Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing. Uh, September is just about over as we're recording this, which means it is officially time for spooky season. And we've got an interesting one for you here tonight.
Joe's
Uh,
ex-girlfriends. Here we go. We will start chronologically.
grab a beverage. We're going to be here a while. Just kidding. I love you, man. Um,
Yeah,
but
it's one of those.
But yeah, I'm Justin, and I'm here tonight with Cody and Brett. And we're going to kick things off with a fairly well-known case. But before we do, let's find out what's been going on. Cody, I know you're a bit worse for wear, so give you a second to recover. Brett, what's new with you?
Well, I mean, this is it was a couple of weeks ago already, but we went and saw Beetlejuice a couple weekends ago, and it was pretty good. It was pretty enjoyable. We went and saw a matinee, took the kids. We kind of we didn't bother to look ahead and see if it was all completely kid friendly. We kind of just assumed it would be reasonably good since the first one was fine. It wasn't like as full of like awful language or anything like that. So and it was fine. The kids, I think they enjoyed it. It was I would say Michael Keaton was like really great, very enjoyable. If you enjoyed the first movie, like I he's maybe even better in this one, like as a character, like like he really does a good job. The rest of the cast I thought was solid overall, some better, some not so great. But there was a lot of good laughs, and yeah, I think if you enjoyed the first one, it's definitely worth going to see the second one. And I've been had a project going for it's kind of been like like in the works here for a few weeks. But this weekend I like really got into it. And my wife wanted to build a custom range hood for over the stove, and having a range hood period was something that been wanting for quite a while. So I was on board with the idea. Essentially, we're taking an old bed frame. It was like a 1920s or something bed frame that we found, and I'm going to use that kind of like as the main decorative piece on it. And then I bought a an insert like the fan with lights and everything, and so I'm going to be I built the frame to hold that on the wall, and the fan now is mounted and functional. I had to wire in a whole new power outlet for that, but that went
Oh,
fine. And so we're about like halfway done through the project, and
Dang.
hopefully the rest of it goes smoothly. So far, it's gone pretty smooth. So we'll see.
cool.
Hopefully, it continues to go that way.
Nice. Well, best of luck. That sounds pretty intensive, but
Yeah, it does. Wow, good for
yeah,
you.
yeah,
I
that's
went.
awesome.
I bought a brand new chop saw.
Oh, I
Cool.
see.
Gotta
So
Honey,
make
I
it
got some.
we
We're
need a
getting something out of
hood
it.
for this.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
I'm just gonna
see.
have to get a brand new saw for this, dude. I
Yep.
don't know what to say.
Yeah, that's smart though.
So
That's smart.
cool, cool. Cody, what about you?
Yeah, well, as we're recording this, I was mentioning that I have had a terrible headache for several days now, which I assumed maybe had a chance to be COVID, but it was not. So I don't know if I have the flu or what, but I've just been kind of feeling yucky last few days. Um, Nevertheless, that has not slowed me down as much as it probably should have. In preparation for Halloween, I was building a little bit, cutting some stuff in the garage on Saturday morning for Halloween, and then also was down in the basement getting high on paint fumes with my kids Saturday night as we were starting to paint the first two cabinets we have kind of painted, I would say, but it's taken a little longer to paint them than I would have guessed. But I was very nice and let my kids help, which takes a little bit longer as well. But I was trying to have them be part of the process also.
Aw.
Other than that, I think I've really just been getting into a couple projects that we previously have talked about on the podcast. Still watching through Castlevania. I'm somewhere in season 3 at this point, I think, and playing a video game that we have coming up here for Spooktober. And other than that, I haven't gotten very far into it, but I guess I will just mention, I feel like on a previous podcast I didn't remember the name of it, but my October book that I chose for Book of the Month is called Summer of Night. And I did finally think of the title for that, and it is more or less, I gather, like Stephen King-esque coming of age type stuff. In the very beginning, I think of chapter one, the kids are like in this giant ancient middle school, elementary school that they're in before it gets shut down for good, essentially like a four-story crazy monstrous building. And one kid goes down into the bathroom on the last day of school. It's like 20 minutes to go. This is in chapter one, so not really a spoiler here. And he and his friends had been like working on smashing a hole through the wall, essentially, in the bottom, which the bathrooms are all in the basement in this school. And then when he gets behind the wall, he sees there's like a gap between that wall and another wall behind that wall. And so he's wiggling, like I could picture him like, squirming down the hall between spiders and crap, and to where he assumes there is more or less like another hole that goes into maybe the girls' bathroom. And so he's all excited about that. But apparently when he gets down there, it is not a light from the girls' bathroom that he was seeing. And we hear some screaming, and he is never seen again as they all leave school for the last day of school for the year. So that's chapter one, but I'm only about 3 chapters in right now. So, but should be a good book for October, I think. How about you? What have you been up to?
First, what was that called again?
It's called Summer of Night, which I think I also inadvertently found out is part of like a 4-season series, like summer, I'm presuming like fall, winter, spring, but I don't know. I didn't know that when I bought it, so did not mean to start a series, but apparently here we are, so there we go.
I love it when that happens.
Right.
But yeah, I might have to check that one out. As for me, well, I have actually had the house to myself for several stretches this week. My wife's been doing a lot of traveling for work and for various interests that she has. The Society for Creative Anachronism, which is like medieval reenactors and stuff. She took a trip with them just past couple of days. So that's given me a lot of time to finish that game that you mentioned that we're going to be talking about in the near future. But also to check out, well, to get into spooky season, I've been watching a lot of horror movies, and some good, some bad, but it gave me a chance to finally check out the Terrifier series, which you might know pretty much from its mascot, Art the Clown, monochrome, psychotic guy in a clown suit, and I enjoyed the first one a lot more than I expected. And I enjoyed the second one until it got really weird towards the end. I don't really know what direction they're taking this in, but it doesn't feel like point A led to point B in a way that makes sense right now. I don't want to spoil anything about the ending or like the last act of that movie, but if you haven't seen these, they're incredibly gory. That's kind of like one of their selling points. But old school slasher flicks, but that were made recently. Pretty much all practical effects. There might be a little bit of CGI here and there, but it proves why practical effects always work because they look convincing. And oh god, some of the stuff looks convincing. But if you can stomach that, it's a pretty good slasher series so far. So been watching a lot of stuff like that, and also discovered that there's a demo out now for what was, I believe, my most anticipated game for 2024, Metaphor ReFantasio, which is like Atlas's first new property in a really long time. And I've been playing it through a bit of that. Mind you, this is a demo. I'm like 2 hours in, and there's still more of it to go, and it's really good so far. Fresh take on just fantasy in general. It has really, likable characters. The voice acting is solid. It's a good looking game. The combat's fun. So yeah, I'm really excited to check this out in a couple of weeks when the full game releases. So if you had any doubts about this game and you like JRPGs with the turn-based combat and all that, definitely have Metaphor ReFantasio on your radar. So yeah, a lot of stuff like that for me lately. Yeah. So with that out of the way, today we are going to be, as I said, diving into spooky season with a little case of something you might have heard of called the SS Ourang Medan. And chances are, if you're familiar with this at all, it is because the name Orang Medan is the same Indonesian as orangutan, where orang means man of. Orangutan means, I believe, man of the forest. Orang Medan means the man from Medan. And if that sounds familiar, it's because there was a game that was released by that title a few years back, a very narrative focused horror experience, I gather. Never played it myself, but it is from a company, Supermassive Games, I think, that does a lot of narrative cinematic horror type experiences. But yeah, that was the first time I'd ever heard of it myself. And basically, the actual case centers around a ship named the SS Ourang Medan that in 1947 sent out a distress call through Morse code, basically SOS, you know, that I'll get into the exact verbiage of later. But it's, rescue ships went out to go investigate it, found the crew dead to a man in states of either intense pain or intense fear.
Including the dog, we should add.
Including the dog. Yes, that's important to note. There were strange things going on with the temperature. No one seemed to know what had happened. And when they tried to tow it back, it burst into flames, seemingly from below deck, and exploded.
The dog?
Well, I mean, it was part of the explosion, but the ship itself. Yeah. Now I say this happened in 1947, or it happened in 1948, or it happened in 1939. And this is where we're getting to part of why this case is so mysterious, because there are a lot of questions that don't seem to have any single answer to them. As far as I can tell, well, before we get into it, had either of you two heard of this case before we decided to cover it?
I was aware of it. I had heard the story previously on a different podcast that I listen to that does a lot of like paranormal type stuff. And I also was aware of the game, so I knew part of the story through that as well. But yeah, I had been fairly familiar with it.
Okay. Yeah, this is one that my students and I did look at, at least once back in the day when I ran a mystery club. We looked into some contemplation of whether this is a true story, whether or not what happened in the elements here are accurate. So this was on my radar for sure. Definitely one I've heard of.
Cool. So yeah, this one is there's a lot of parts that just don't add up, and I think that's part of why it's such an endearing mystery, including the mystery of did this ship even exist? But we'll get there. So as far as I was able to tell, the first recorded news story about this ship, the SS Ourang Medan, was from the Daily Mirror, the Hampshire Telegraph, and the Yorkshire Post in November of 1939. Or excuse me, that they reported that was the date the ship was discovered and then exploded, but it was published in about a year later, 1940. They didn't cite a source aside from saying that the person that they had heard all this from was from Trieste, Italy. I apologize if I'm pronouncing that wrong. But according to this unnamed person, the Ourang Medan sent out a distress call in November 1939. That call was picked up by Navy stations in Germany, Rome, and France, or Germany, Italy, and France, I suppose I should say. And they were able to, between them, triangulate its position to somewhere near the Solomon Islands. So a rescue ship was sent. In this case, that ship was not named. And then when they got there, they discovered what I had mentioned before. But I should mention what the actual SOS was. It was sent in Morse code, and the wording of this seems to be consistent throughout the different accounts. So this is like the one thing that seems to hold true as far as I've been able to tell. Um, the message went, and I quote, "We float, all officers, including the captain, dead in the chart room and on the bridge, probably whole of crew dead." Following that, there's what has been reported as like an unintelligible mishmash of dots and dashes, and then either right afterwards or several minutes later, the message simply, "I die." And what do you make of of this, you two? Because to me, it kind of feels like that scene from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where they find the painting on the cave wall, and the Grail is in the castle of ah. Like, would you really stop and take the time to tap out in Morse code "I die" before you
Castle of
croaked? Ah, no, from the back of the throat. Ah.
uh the first thing that that jumps out at me about this is the fact that I mean, it seems to be sent in Morse code. There was like a couple places I looked at, like, didn't state what it almost made it sound more like it was a like an audio distress. But I mean, I seriously, I don't think that was true. But like, it still comes back to the fact that like Morse code messages wouldn't be this long, I don't believe. Like you tapping out all those letters in Morse code is not easy, and you don't want to add more words than you need to. So the fact that they're like adding in words like probably dead, I think they would just say captain and crew dead. They would, and they wouldn't like add like no one cares where they're dead. Just say they're dead.
Right.
So to me it's odd. Like I don't know that. I'm not saying that it's not true, but like that seems weird.
Yeah.
Or maybe like, I mean, you could say like maybe like the person who sent it wasn't up to like proper ways of sending Morse code, but then they wouldn't know how to send Morse code either. So
yeah, that's a good point. I'm trying to find. I thought there was one of these sites I had that did say there was some discrepancies with the Morse code message that was sent. Like they were slightly different. They were reported slightly different in a couple of the stories, but no, I'm not finding that, of course, now. But I don't know. I do want to say that you might get into this more, but the timing in this case is really one of the standout features for me of like, if the earliest we have is 1939, 1940, just how different of a world the world was during those years, during basically the beginning of World War II versus like 1947, 48, very different world, very different environment that ships would be going around in on top of all of this. So I do think that is worth noting for a couple of reasons here tonight that we'll get into.
Yeah, so already, even just from the initial reporting, there is stuff that just seems weird. But again, to reiterate the account of what they saw upon boarding the ship. So this at this point, unnamed rescue vessel, it found the ship. They called out. They tried everything they could to signal and get a response from pretty much anyone who might have still been alive on there, and they got nothing. So eventually, they sent over a boarding party, and like scattered all over, there are people who are frozen dead. Well, not like literally frozen, but like stock stiff. Expressions of utter terror on their faces. Some accounts have said that they have their hands up like they're trying to fend off something that's above them. Others seem to leave that out. The dog as well was dead with a snarl frozen on its face. As they ventured below decks, most stories do also mention a noticeable temperature change. Like this is in the Indian Ocean, so very very hot. Reports suggest it was easily around 100 degrees outside. Reports from the sailors who boarded and went below decks say that it might have been as low as 40, which is a marked change in temperature, and refrigeration certainly was a thing, but there didn't seem to be any indication that there was any sort of icebox or anything that would be pardon, that would be generating that change, that difference in heat. Um, but yeah, they boarded. They all got pretty much got creeped out, understandably. But they decided, well, all we can do is try to tow this back to shore. So they set up, the tow lines and everything. And as soon as they started to drag it away, smoke began billowing up from below decks. And thankfully, everyone had evacuated the ship back to the ship that they arrived on, because the explosion was powerful enough that multiple sources say it lifted the Ourang Medan up out of the water before it completely broke apart, disintegrated, and everything sank, conveniently leaving no trace.
It lifted the ship out of the water.
Yep, I think this account mentioned that as well, but if not this one, multiple ones from this point onward say that the explosion was that strong that there was space between the ship and the surface of the ocean.
Can you lift a
Wow.
ship out of the water? Is that possible? I mean, theoretically, but
Unless the shockwave pressing down was enough to push it. That alone seems like a very odd element to include.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that before, and that does seem quite unlikely. I mean, if something were had exploded like within the belly of the ship,
Mhm.
a lot of that force, because it still has the ship has this bottom yet, so a lot of that force is just it's taken up by like all sides of the ship, so it would be pushing down on the ship as much as it would be pushing up on the ship,
You'd
and
think,
it wouldn't lift it out of the water.
yeah,
right?
that
Unless
seems
the
a little odd.
unless somehow the explosion originated from underneath, but maybe we'll get to some theories that talk about
Unless
that.
it was a paranormal explosion. I did want to go back for a second here
Sure.
on the topic of the Morse code message that was sent, which I've never thought about this before, but as I understand it, like Morse code was developed and people used it based on a system of English, which I've never stopped to consider before. But like, if I didn't know English, could I use Morse code? Or is there a variant of Morse code that used language letters from different languages? How does that work? I've never considered that.
That
Yeah,
is a
that's
really good
like,
question. Like certain
But they-
abbreviations.
American Englishman bias here.
The last
That's a really
person
good
aboard who happened to know English was the only one left.
But
I've never thought of that. I
Interesting.
just thought that was weird.
yeah. I mean, I'm
Because
sure certain abbreviations like SOS are universal, but beyond that,
yeah,
yeah,
because
like
I don't remember if you said it or not, but the most records seem to say that the ship was said to be Dutch in origin.
yes.
So they likely
Very Swedish, my bad.
wouldn't be
Jeez.
like right. I mean, they don't. English isn't the standard language in the
Right.
Netherlands, is it? I don't think it is.
No, not at all.
I mean, it's certainly back in 1940s. I don't think it was either.
No. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that actually does raise some interesting questions.
Okay, just curious.
Okay. Well, we'll put a pin in that one for now and jump to the next account. So this is 8 years later, in I believe this was a Dutch periodical named De Locomotief. In February 3rd, 1948, they reported that the SS Ourang Medan had sunk in June of 1947. This actually included, hang on, I see Cody just sent us a thing. 1 second.
I just found a website. This is on medium.com, and this is off where you're at the moment, so I apologize. But this has a supposed picture of one of the corpses, which I've never seen claimed before.
That photo.
Are you gonna get to that?
I can get to it now if you want, since it's on the screen.
Okay.
So, yeah, this I wish I had the page bookmarked where they actually broke down everything that's wrong with this. But I want you to focus on the shoes. Those are, I believe they said they were a type of, or like some sort of make or model of Adidas shoes, which, believe it or not, is a more venerable brand than you might expect, but not back to the 1940s. So that right there discredits the fact that this is actually from that time period. And I do believe the person who pointed that out also pointed out that this same photo was used as supposed evidence for another dead or missing person, like completely unrelated to this. And that person, I believe, was actually female. And if you look closely, you can see on this what is actually a mannequin. The chest does look like it does have a bit of a swell to it. So yeah,
This
this is
looks
not.
slightly mannequin-esque.
Yeah. It's that is one I've seen posted around, along with a lot of pictures of the ship, supposed pictures of the ship itself. But
Oh,
all of those that I've been able to look into can be traced back to other existing vessels that were nowhere near the area or areas where the SS Ourang Medan was supposedly sunk.
I was
Um,
searching this photo while you were chatting there, but looks like 2015 is the first instance of this ever being online, and it is mentioned in conjunction with this mystery, but I don't know where it's from beyond that.
Yeah,
So
now that
okay.
you mention it, that does look like the arms and the hands look a bit unnatural. Like they would
Mhm.
could very well be a mannequin.
Yeah, like rigor mortis can keep, limbs in a position to some extent, but that's a really weird pose.
Yeah. Well, even just like
Um,
the shape of them, like this doesn't have
yeah,
this person doesn't have a wrist. It's just like the arm goes straight into the hand.
you're not wrong.
it's fair.
Um, but yeah, um, so yeah, there have been a lot of examples of supposed photographic evidence, but it seems like almost to almost shot for shot they can be discredited or attached to other things. Um, but let's see. But that said, the leitmotif. Apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Locomotive did include photos supposedly of a capsized ship that was supposed to be the U.S. or the SS Ourang Medan, and the dead sailor, which I believe is the picture you just linked us to as well. Um, but their account of everything that happened supposedly came from an unnamed member of the rescue crew who was involved in all of this. And this time, not only being happening in a different year, it happened in a different part of the ocean. So the first account claimed it happened near the Solomon Islands, and those are for those who aren't as familiar with uh, oceanography around that side of the world. They are to the northeast of Australia. So like very kind of far flung off the beaten path, but still, I think, near shipping lanes. The Marshall Islands are even farther northeast from that. By I'm not exactly sure how far, but if you compare them on a map, that's a
It's a
sizable
ways,
amount
yeah.
of ocean. So yeah, it's still in the same general ballpark, but a very different part of the sea. Um, so that's where they claimed that they attempted the rescue. Uh, and this time it still says the SOS was received by one unnamed ship and possibly forwarded, but not, it didn't explain who it was forwarded to. Otherwise, the details of the account more or less match up with what was reported back in 1940.
And it's
Um,
just I think it's fair to jump in here. It
yeah.
so like the story that I have seen primarily claims that it happened in the Malacca Strait, which is between Malaysia and what is this? Well, essentially,
Singapore.
Medan is right there. Like this is a map I'm looking at. It doesn't say what is that part of. I guess it's still part of Malaysia. I guess that's all Malaysia.
Yeah, I think it's between Malaysia and
Anyways,
Singapore.
yeah.
I believe. Let me double check. Um, but yeah, I will get to that. I do promise. The Strait of Malacca. Let's see. Uh, yeah, the Indonesian island of Sumatra, and I do believe Singapore is the other. Um, but funny you should mention that because a year later, or like half a year later, actually, other articles from the same periodical, De Locomotive, in February 28th and March 13th, had a different story relating to the SS Ourang Medan, claiming that it sunk not in June of 1947 or in November of 1939, but in February of 1948. This one it claimed to have been from a man named Silvio Shirley, well, it's not entirely clear who he was, but he was from Trieste, Italy, and he either was a missionary or he was recounting a story he heard from a missionary. It's never been 100% clear on that point. But he claims he talked to the only survivor of the Ourang Medan before that man died on the Marshall Islands. And according to him, that survivor abandoned the ship before help arrived, before the SOS was even sent. And he claimed that there was an illegal cargo of nitroglycerin and sulfuric acid being transported. And he felt something bad was going to happen. And he took one of the lifeboats and rowed away until he ended up on the Marshall Islands, where he was found by this Silvio Shirley person, or the missionary that Silvio Shirley talked to, related the story, and then died. Not immediately, but he died. And but according to this account, this is where the Strait of Malacca comes in, and that is, I believe, and it was an important shipping lane through the Indian Ocean, and I think is still to this day, where
big time.
a sizable amount of seagoing commerce does pass through there. And it would make sense if it was in that area that it would. It would make sense for it to be there, whereas in the other two locations, not as much. So yeah, that is a second, possibly third-hand account from someone who claims that they talked to a survivor. As far as I remember, that seems to be the only mention of a survivor. But there are many other accounts that follow after this. But did you either of you have anything to say about this particular one?
I would just have a hard time believing somebody bailed out in a rowboat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean just because they had a bad hunch. Or, I mean, the fact that they would have landed on the Marshall Islands, unless they were like literally within sight of them passing by, I mean, I don't think they'd have made it to begin with. So
Right, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I have the one story that I heard did apparently the crew that was on the rescue ship reported that there was a lifeboat missing from the Ourang Medan.
Okay.
So potentially that lines up there. But I've also heard that the island that he supposedly washed up on was so small as to, like, it's uninhabited and there's no reason for a missionary to even be there. So
fair point.
How real that seems to be, it seems pretty thin.
I can agree with that.
Yeah.
But as the years rolled on, more and more articles kept being written about it. There were proceedings from the Merchant Marine Council in 1952, which also claimed that the ship sunk in February of 1948, but they didn't cite a source for where they got that information. 3 years later, the Liverpool Echo in August of 1955 also didn't state a source, listed the Straits of Malacca as the place, but this time mentions two rescue ships from Dutch Sumatra and British Malaya that were dispatched to investigate and try to save any survivors. Other accounts mentioned that somehow the U.S. Navy sent ships to go and try to rescue them. A ship or ships named the Silver Star in the city of Baltimore. Accounts I've seen that mention any U.S. response at all seem to suggest that it was the Silver Star that responded. Except there was no mention of the Ourang Medan in the Silver Star's logs, and I've seen it recorded that that ship itself was actually located near Brazil at the time that this all happened. But who's to say, because it happened over who knows how many years.
This is a good point to just bring in, though. Like,
sure.
The ship registries around the world, which seem like they're fairly accurate most of the time. Does not have this listing of the SS Ourang Medan, but the Silver Star is a real ship. It is, it's in the logs. Its history you can find, although where exactly it was during some of these time periods maybe is not necessarily there, but like at least we know that that is a real ship and had real people that were above it. I remember the other point I was going to bring up earlier, which was all of these stories conveniently mention that they hooked up the ship to like tow it, but, and I don't profess to work in the Navy or know a ton about ships, but wouldn't you leave like a skeleton crew on that second ship to like guide it back in any way, shape, or form rather than remove all of your people from it?
One would think.
Yeah, because it apparently it was like a sailing ship, right? It wasn't like a steel naval ship. That was like an old like a pirate ship, as you would visualize a pirate ship.
I've heard
this is a good point.
Wooden with sails, and those ships, to my knowledge, probably wouldn't tow very well. Maybe I'm wrong there, but
yeah. But yeah, I'm glad you that the records were brought up because there's no record of any ship by the name of Ourang Medan. The closest thing that seemed to exist at that time was a Dutch ship simply named Medan. But it was listed as being quote unquote broken up in 1930, so well before any of this happened. That's the closest thing to any official record that seems to exist for this vessel under this name, at least. But I'm going to. This brings us to perhaps the most bizarre account of any of this that I've seen, which was a letter sent to the assistant to the director of the CIA from someone calling themselves C.H. Mark Jr. That's Mark spelled M-A-R-C-K. Now, he lists no source for the information that he got. He mentions the same, the same date, 1948, the same two rescue ships being sent to investigate it. But this seems to be the first mention of a possible paranormal cause.
Oh.
And I know this because the document is declassified on the CIA's website, and I have a copy in front of me right now. I'll send it to you guys if you want to look at it yourselves. If I can figure out how to send a file through, I'll send it through Facebook. It's really small enough. So yeah, this is pretty wild. And I really kind of question like how CIA procedure was back then. Like, could just any Yahoo send messages to the director of the CIA and expect a response?
I think Yahoo came later.
Well done. But yeah, I'm going to read attach file. But yeah, I'm going to read like the part where things get really weird, like word for word, because it deserves it. Okay, there's the file. And send. Okay, so he first mentions anything about the paranormal fairly early on, like first paragraph. He says, also, do you think, quote, something from the unknown, unquote, is involved? And I should point out that I've been able to find absolutely nothing about this person, this supposed C.H. Mark Jr., aside from the fact that he is someone who doesn't quite understand how quotation marks are used, and you'll see as you read through it. But he starts talking about on page 2 here. I feel sure that the SS Ourang Medan tragedy holds the answer to many of these airplane accidents and unsolved mysteries of the sea. Also, I have often thought about the many sightings of huge fiery spheres rising from the sea or disappearing into the sea. There are actual quotations there by ships, captains, and crews in the 18th and 19th centuries. There are alarming passages in Old English chronicles written by medieval Latin and in Latin incunabula, or books printed before the year 1500 AD, which suggests that these fiery spheres cause destruction and that they come from within our planet. For instance, in 216 BC, quote, these things like ships were seen in the sky over Italy. In Sardinia, a knight was making his rounds inspecting the posts guarding the rampart when a stick in his hands burst into flames, quote unquote. I don't think Sardinia existed in 216 BC. Correct me if I'm wrong, but But yeah, he goes on and on talking about a quote unquote round shield in the sky, and yeah, just really unhinged stuff. And how this got through even to the assistant to the CIA director is bizarre, and yet it is cited as one of the accounts of what happened to the SS Ourang Medan. So this case just keeps getting weirder and weirder the deeper you dig into it.
This seems
Um,
like a nut job.
it does, but the fact that it had to be declassified is interesting in and of itself for reasons we might get to in a bit here. Um, but with that in mind, I think that is the last official, I use that in air quotes as well, account that I've been able to dig up on this. Anything that you two want to say about that, or anything leading up to it before we start to talk about possible explanations for what happened, or if the ship even existed?
I guess coming back to I mean, this not to the point that you were just making, but just one thing that I had in mind here was we're talking about the Silver Star as being like the recorded as the primary U.S. ship that came in rescue attempt. And I didn't go look into the history of it deeply myself, but apparently that vessel wasn't even called the Silver Star during
Oh,
either of the possible time periods for this
oh,
event to happen. Like it was called the Silver Star, like in between those dates for a short period, and then the name changed for whatever reason.
oh.
But yes, logbooks for that ship, as you said, do not show any this event ever happening to that vessel. So
Ignore the details. Just ignore them. No, I don't have much to add other than when we get to possible explanations here again, I just want to remember the differences in the years, which I'll bring back up here.
Sure. Okay. On that note, let's start with explanations. I'll get things
Aliens.
started.
Done.
We can start with aliens. I was going to start with the most plausible, but okay, let's do that.
Aliens.
I mean, there was Mr. Mark's quotations about fiery spheres and flaming discs and knights from Sardinia. So
he was the
uh,
alien.
Yeah, that's
ooh,
possible.
oh, what a twist!
Yeah.
Um,
He like destroys the ship and nobody saw it, and he's like, "Hey, did you guys hear about this story? This ship over here, something happened to him." God damn it, nobody saw it.
um, I mean, whenever we do one of these, it seems like aliens is always tossed out there as an explanation. And it feels, aside from like the weird state that the bodies were found in, and the the strange feeling of cold, it doesn't really feel like there's anything to tie this to an
Yeah.
alien. Yeah. So I think are we rating these, or are we just kind of like doing a yay or nay or plausible,
We
or
could just do a yay or nay and pick.
okay. Okay. So yeah, aliens, I think we're all pretty much in agreement. Not
Yeah,
a
I don't
plausible.
see any. There's no evidence for it. I guess it could be a possibility, but there's no evidence for it.
Okay. Do we want to stick with the weird ones, or do we want to go with something a bit more mundane next?
Yes. Whatever.
Okay. So I'll start with the what had been the top of my list until now.
Ooh.
That the possibility that there was a carbon monoxide leak that had caused the crew to well, carbon monoxide is an odorless, tasteless gas that can cause people to asphyxiate and die in pretty short order if it's concentrated. I didn't know until researching this that it was actually flammable, which apparently it is.
Oh.
And yeah, the fact that maybe the leak built up to such an extent that something in the I don't know if the rescue crew tried to start the engine to make it easier to tow or what, but something set it on fire and the concentration caused it to explode. Um, it's probably one of the more natural explanations to all of this. Um, so I have a few issues with it, but what do you two think?
Um, I don't know that I like the idea of carbon monoxide as a cause. Um, Simply because I mean the crew, you certainly can die from that, but also I think like most naval crews would know, like that's not like a fast acting death. It's essentially like strangulation. It's not like you are affected by it and like cannot react to it. It's like, oh man, something's going on here. I'm gonna get to fresh air. That's what that's what you're told to do. That's what you do. So they would have gone on deck, and then they would have been presumably safe at that point.
Yeah, I don't know about this one. I was just trying to think of like, could it account for the supposed legend of like how their faces looked? I mean, I guess if they were basically losing their oxygen in such a way that their body is asphyxiating, then it could kind of give you a face similar to like gasping for breath with your last breath could resemble the supposed way their faces looked. Not impossible, but I don't know.
Yeah, go on.
Well, I was just gonna piggyback off of that with a like a slightly different possible version of that.
Oh,
and
sure.
unless you want to add something directly to that.
Yeah, real quick. My main issue with this, aside from the whole fresh air thing, is that why wouldn't that have all exploded earlier than that? If the gas was, leaking to that extent, and back when the engines and all the equipment had been running, you think something would have set it off before the rescue ships even got there. That's my main thing with this particular theory.
Maybe the fireball hadn't come out of the earth yet.
But yes, go on with what you were going to add there, Brett.
Well, just a slightly different take on that. So, it was reported that possibly this ship was carrying potassium cyanide and nitroglycerin as two of its cargoes that potentially were like black market, like they weren't supposed to. It's not something you're supposed to be transporting, but the idea perhaps that those combined to create a gas that would have killed and like been more deadly or more because there are like gases can cause like muscular disfigurement and things that it affects your muscular system in ways that could like leave you like kind of disfigured and like kind of frozen in place, like freezes your muscles. And I think that could possibly cause what they say they saw this crew describe the crew as looking like on the ship. But I can't find I was trying to search like if anyone knows like what those things when combined do, and I can't find anything that says exactly what they would do together. So I think it's possible, but I don't know.
That was actually the next thing on my list. And if not, those two things themselves combining, perhaps reacting with seawater, like they weren't properly secured, properly stored. But yeah, I don't necessarily want to end up on a watch list that badly to research exactly how these reactions go. But yeah, that is, I think that is a bit more of a plausible explanation than just the carbon monoxide, because there was at least one report saying that, hey, this ship was smuggling, stuff it wasn't supposed to. So I would consider this one kind of plausible. But I'll do you one better and one weirder. So what if instead of just like high explosives, what if the Ourang Medan wasn't actually called the Ourang Medan? And what if what it was smuggling was, well, chemical or biological nerve agents? Chemical and biological nerve agents, which were outlawed by the League of Nations in, I think it was shortly before World War II. No, excuse me, right after 1945, which then became the UN, which the US had joined after World War II, and thus was bound by its rules and regulations, which ties back into the idea that maybe American ships were sent to rescue the Ourang Medan, but instead of rescuing it, to cover up the fact that the US was using this supposed Dutch freighter to transport illegal, weapons of war, they radioed in the location and the US Navy sunk it, which could theoretically explain why the ship lifted out of the water if the attack came from below, say, a submarine. This is one of the more wild and yet almost more plausible explanations I've seen for this, because the government isn't always on the up and up. I'd hate to say it, and especially if they had been in possession of these weapons before they joined the UN, and suddenly they're holding all of this illegal material. You got to do something with it, and if something went wrong with the ship, and if they were sending out a distress signal, well, that loose end has to be tied up. And nerve agents, being what they are, they can do really nasty stuff to you. Dying in a look of pain and terror doesn't seem like it would be outside the realm of possibility.
So you're saying it was a U.S. ship that was torpedoed by the U.S.?
That is, well, not it was a ship employed by the U.S., the Ourang Medan. Its name wasn't actually the Ourang Medan. That was a fake name put on it in case anyone going, happened to catch on to what they were doing. It would make it harder to trace.
But they would have known what was on the ship, you're saying?
Once the SOS went out, and help was on its way. Yeah, that's what the theory is. And that in order to avoid UN sanctions or whatever the result would have been, the U.S. took action and sunk it themselves.
Not to throw water on that, but wouldn't the U.S. have never boarded the ship then to have seen the faces of the people that are frozen on it?
That is certainly, one of the wrinkles in this. I'm not saying it's an ironclad theory by any means, but I do find it an interesting one at least.
Okay.
I mean, at that point, if the ship itself is a cover-up, then a story of finding the crew on board dead would also just be a cover-up too.
Yeah, who knows? They might have been alive when the U.S. support got there, and didn't stay that way. Yeah. There's all these different possible interpretations of this one, which is why I like this theory.
Just seems like if the U.S. was behind it, then why would they start a rumor or a legend about a period, much less just sink the ship and it took its secret to the bottom of the ocean?
Well, I mean, look at how many conflicting dates there are. Look at how many conflicting details. I mean, muddy the water enough and nothing's clear. So it just becomes another ghost story. And we all know that the sea has no shortage of ghost stories.
Mm-hmm.
So,
it does. I like a lot of that. I feel like it's very believable. Especially for 40s and 50s U.S. government, that sounds like it would fit pretty well. Though the biggest snag in that is that we have an article from 1940 of the of that same story. So,
yep,
I don't see how that fits in together.
That is very true. I mean, I like this as a tale, but yeah, when you really start to piece through it, there are cracks. And much as I'd like to say that this is a plausible explanation, unless the U.S. invented time travel, there's no way they could have staged it that far in advance, to put fake stories out there years and years before it happened. So much as I enjoy this one, I don't think it's a plausible explanation in the end.
I do think this one's getting at a bit of what I was talking about with the date, though. If we are to believe that the original incident took place in 1940 or 39, perhaps even, then that is both it's what do I want to say here? It's more believable, I think, that during the war, something could have been going on that would have been tried to keep under wraps, like you're saying, with some kind of nerve gas or things of that nature. I don't know, I was just doing my own historical timeline here, as far as the Japanese, Pearl Harbor, yes, but before that, invading French Indochina, September 22nd of 1940 was when they had their first aggressive move in World War II. So as far as why would they be shipping those types of chemicals across the middle of nowhere Pacific Indian Ocean land ahead of time, I don't know. Now, if the report from November 1940 in the newspapers was right after this came to be in September 22nd of 1940 when the Japanese did that, then I guess I could see that possibly they could have a ship down there with some sort of material on it, less than 2 months after basically the war had expanded quite a bit. That's believable. I also think it's very possible that if something did happen during the war, it was probably a much higher chance that it just didn't get the exposure it should have. And like the story was just kind of pushed on the back burner, which I know is another potential theory I've seen out there on one of these as well, which is that like somebody basically made up this story, but as it happened in 1940 when it was originally published, like nobody saw it really because, there was a war going on. And so they like re-brought this story back up years later to be like, hey, here's this really interesting story we heard. And then it kind of caught on after that. And now we talk about it today still.
Yeah, possible, certainly. Well, the last one I have under my list of explanations is the one that I'm sure we were, aside from aliens, the one that we were all waiting for, ghosts. So some sort of paranormal entity or force killed all of the crew and somehow exploded the boat. This is one this is about the extent of that theory I've seen out there. Basically, ghosts did it, and I don't think there's much to it, but I figured I'd throw it out there since I did see it listed as ghosts or some sort of paranormal force.
Well, maybe explains the rigidity and depth of the bodies. I don't know.
Yeah.
Beyond that.
Yeah, just for completeness sake, I wanted to put that one in there. But it sounded like you had a bunch of interesting ones there, Cody.
Well, I do have a couple more here on a couple sites I was looking at. One was, and I don't really know how this would fully explain it either, but one was pirates is mentioned as one. Just that the ship maybe had been attacked or that somebody had basically gone aboard the ship and attacked them with something. They still could have, used some kind of poison gas or something like that to like kill the crew. I don't know what they would be looking for, if it would be a random attack or like why they would choose that ship to begin with. But it also says on a few of these websites too, I think that when the crew that originally boarded the ship and found all of the other crew, more or less like their cargo and equipment had been untouched. Like no one had taken parts off radios and like stolen things out of the cargo hold or anything like that. So I don't know that necessarily fits either. Yeah, beyond that, I don't know. I guess for me, I'm just thinking like if this really did take place when it took place, the details of it probably will be lost to time, either because there was more important things happening in the world at the time or because there was a war going on. Like, I'm sure there must be countless stories of ships that had some sort of an objective that'll never come to light, here in 2024 about what they were actually up to during the world wars, with some secret objective or mission they had, or perhaps they were transporting some sort of material that would have been frowned upon. I don't know, but I do think that if you put this on the backdrop of the war or even the tension leading up to the war, that creates far more possibilities that there is something to this case. What that is, I'm not positive, but I definitely feel like there's more chances that there is more to this than just a ghost story if you take that as the backdrop.
One thing I would kind of play off of that, not that ghosts were the cause of it, but the idea that it was itself a ghost ship. Specifically that the rescue ships that came and found it found something that was like stuck in like a time loop. So like it had already sunk previously, like a ghost haunting a house. Like this ship is haunting the sea, which could explain why this happened like 8 years apart and the event was the same.
Oh, weird. Like it's happening over and over, and people just,
Yes.
That one's fun.
wow, that's cool.
It's like right out of Star Trek.
Yeah.
I'm certain that was an episode at some point.
Interesting. Interesting.
I
Huh.
mean, considering all the inconsistencies in location and like you said, time and all that, it makes as much sense as like any of the other ones we've covered. Um, in terms of that, it's interesting to think about. But yeah, it there's always going to be like some elements that don't really fit. But I like it from at least a storytelling standpoint.
Yeah. I wonder, I've seen people on some websites go really far down the rabbit hole trying to get to the bottom of this. Um, to the point where they're like searching newspapers around the world and trying to find like mentions of this ghost ship and things of that nature. I'm curious if anybody has ever tried to cross-reference that with ghost ship tales in general. Um, because I feel like this story has some dated elements to it. I've seen the ship described as a frigate, a warship, a pirate ship. Like I've seen some different things here to that. The name doesn't appear. It seems like this could easily be one of like a campfire tale, but for sailors. That they're like, hey, did you hear about this ghost ship? Or like they use it to like scare the new guy, on their first tour of duty or something.
Mhm.
But at some point, somebody had to have added in these specific details. Like the Silver Star was a ship at one point. Somebody probably either heard about that or maybe had even been on the Silver Star at one point, and so that got added into the story. Like this location change seemed to be updated based on what was happening maybe in the world at the time, so that got added in and updated. But I'd be curious if you went back further, if you could find like unnamed ships in like that region that had like a similar tale that just haven't been connected to this one yet.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that's for sure. But I think that kind of that exhausts all the notes that I had. Um, anything else? Anything else from you two, or were we ready for like what we think is the most plausible explanation?
That's all I got.
Yeah, I'm
Okay,
ready.
okay. Want me to go first, or
Not if you're gonna say aliens.
okay, I'll go first. I think if this happened at all, and that is a big if at this point, like big air quotes if, to take a page from our friend Mr. Mark. Um, I I think the most likely thing is that it was carrying some sort of illegal cargo of either explosives or nerve agents, and not that it was sunk by U.S. interests or U.S. forces, but that it was stored improperly. And it either was able to mix with itself or with seawater or something, which caused fumes or some sort of toxic release that killed the crew, and was volatile enough to explode afterwards. That to me, I think, is the most plausible explanation, but I'm still not even 100% convinced that this happened. And neither was the Day Locomotive when it ran its last article about it. I believe in their closing words, they refer to it as but an intriguing romance, I believe is how they put it, when romance had a different meaning back then.
Yeah.
Um, but if it happened, I think that's the most reasonable explanation. What about you guys?
I feel like I most likely have to fall into the least interesting explanation for this, in that it is just a made up story, completely made up. Perhaps taken from some bits and pieces of truth and turned into a like an interesting uh like really fictional story to get people you know sell some stories or something.
Mm.
There's just too much that doesn't have and like any evidence behind it. So like the ship apparently didn't exist in any registers.
Mm.
um it there's too many inconsistencies for it to have a real grounded explanation of like a base of like what was true and what isn't true, and just lots of things that just don't add up. And I had heard, and I didn't write it down, but apparently from what I understand, the guy who the Silvio Sciarli of Trieste, who apparently he was the source. Like you say, he was the guy who apparently took the the story from the missionary, or was the missionary. Like he was the source of the original article in 1940, and then also was the source in 1947-48.
Oh,
I can't confirm this. I didn't look deeply into it, but I did hear this, which would suggest perhaps that he fabricated the original story and then came back and kind of like Cody was saying earlier about like, oh, by the way, while the war is going on, you missed this story that I made up. How about you take another look at it? It seems like that could be a possibility.
Interesting.
Okay. Yeah. This is really a fun one just because of the like gruesome way the bodies were supposedly found, and the, of course, convenient explosion of the ship and everything else. But I gotta go pretty close to word for word with Brett on this one. I just think it was stories. I mean, there's a million ghost ship stories. There's a million things that would get reported. You know, the right person hears the right tale, and maybe they run to the news and they're like, I heard this thing. We didn't mention, I don't think, in the podcast, but like this was all originally reported by the Associated Press. This is a high level organization that was reporting this. It wasn't like, nobody was. And that's also why it probably spread as far as it did as well, though, because the AP had even then the reputation of like, we report the news and this is what the news is. And so people probably took this and ran with this, and it became pretty famous because of that. But I just have to assume that this is probably something that was a story somebody made up and details got added to it, and there's probably no credence to this whatsoever, which, saddens me on this one. But I do think, though, if we can place this during tensions leading into World War II at the time period, that there is always a chance that there was some sort of a secret operation going on and some sort of a covert rescue mission, or maybe there really was an SOS. And I'm sure there was a lot of things happening that nations were not being very forward about with the news to be like, hey, by the way, we have this ship full of stuff here, right? I mean, because that's as old as probably naval activities period, is like, here's a ship and we're telling you it's for this reason, but really it's for this reason. So I think it's probably just an urban legend on the seas, but I do think if it has a shred of a chance, it's only due to its original time period that it's placed in. But I would say it's probably made up.
Well, fair enough. Well, there you have it, folks.
It was the orangutans.
Two tall tales and one guy who really wants to believe. But either way, true or false, it is still a really interesting case. I don't think we'll ever really get a solid answer, but sometimes that's part of the fun, the chase rather than the destination. So I hope you enjoyed. This is our introduction to spooky season, and we've got more in store for you later. So until then, this has been Justin, Cody, and Brett, and we'll see you next time.
Watch your dog.
Bye.
See ya. Hey, fondlings and fondlers. This has been another episode of Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing, your favorite podcast. It's most people's favorite podcast, or at least so my mom tells me. You can check us out all over the place online at our homepage, www.fondpod.com or fondpodcast.com. You can also check us out across your social media sites, including Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, YouTube, and anywhere else you get your streamed podcast. Thanks so much.